Welcome, everybody. I'm Steve Okun, CEO of APAC Advisors. This is the third in our geopolitical series on Iran. And for this one, now that we enter week three of the war, the question that we're all trying to watch is, how long is this going to go on? When is it going to come to an end? And we're going to have quite a discussion on what that means, what defines the end, and then what we should be looking for next. If we look and think about geopolitical events, if we use the MSCI Europe Index as a proxy, for the last 60 years, there has only been one geopolitical event that has had a negative impact on the economy longer than 12 months. And that was the Yom Kippur War of 1973. Every other geopolitical crisis, the global economy has come out of it in less than a year. You pick one, the Iranian Revolution in 79, Putin's invasion of Crimea, or the takeover of Crimea in 2014, the invasion of Ukraine in 2022, the Gulf War in 91, the Gaza War in 2023. All of them, the economy has always come back within 12 months, except the one time, and that was the Yom Kippur War in 73. And that is because it led to an oil embargo and a sustained global energy shock. And the question is, will this crisis that we're in right now, the war with Iran that we're in right now, will this be will this follow the normal historical pattern of geopolitical crises where 12 months from now we're going to be back to where we started? Or is this going to be the anomaly of 1973 and have a real negative impact for a longer period of time? And so that's the question that I'm going to leave to Simon and that he's been dealing with. And Simon, turn it over to you.
Thanks, Steve. So you've identified the escalation ladder, which is available to Iran as it seeks to deter this mow the grass strategy. Obviously, Iran was hit last year with a bombing campaign. This year, clearly, they've been hit as well. And so I take from your approach that essentially this cycle of military attacks is the last thing they want to see continuing, as well as, of course, anything that threatens their position in power. Okay, so over to me. I am by training an international trade economist, a development economist, did a lot of work on East Asia when I started my career in Washington, D.C. at the Brookings Institution and in the World Bank. And one of the things I always found there was a huge shortage of was high quality data what governments are doing. And so the reason this slide is here is to highlight that the foundation I set up many years ago essentially tracks very systematically what governments are doing in the area of trade, industrial policy, digital policies, and the like. And this informs my sort of view of the world, which I will build on in this presentation. But I'm also not going to rely on Simon's view of the world. I'm going to rely on other people's too. So if we go roll forward to the next slide, essentially when this crisis came up, our tech team and came to me and said, look, is there any way we can contribute to understanding what's going on in the Gulf conflict? And I reflected on that and thought, yes, we're going to get a cacophony of different views presented. And so why don't we, rather than just try and have Simon or others filter through all of this different information, why don't we try and systematically identify different perspectives associated with the study of how wars initiate, and how they escalate and how they end. And so as a result, we grabbed everything we could in those relevant literatures and ingested them into a very confined and defined corpus for an AI tool. And we created 14 different analyst positions on this particular crisis. So one of the analysts positions looks at it from the perspective of the US military. Another analyst looks at it from the perspective of the Republican Guards. And others look at all the different sort of perspectives on conflict. What we did then was to essentially to allow these 14 analysts to update their perspectives every day, 3 times a day, based on the latest information. We don't let them talk to each other initially. And then we get these analysts to fight with one another over what is a consensus view, or at least what is a view which is joined by most. including in our 14 analysts, is a red team, which I'll talk about later, which is deliberately set up to try and sort of oppose or challenge whatever median view emerges. Now, the reason for giving you this setup is the so what from this type of setup is that by generating 14 different perspectives on how this war is going to go forward, a human expert can challenge their own perspectives or get challenged by these different AI agents who are forced and disciplined to follow a particular line of reasoning and have and are not allowed to make claims without providing supporting evidence. So this is a very disciplined sort of AI agent-driven perspective. And let me show you some of the results because they're quite interesting. As of 6 o'clock European time yesterday, when we look at the 8 possible outcomes that which we considered, from negotiated exit, President Trump declaring victory and going home, the Iranians submitting. Scenario B2 is grinding submission, where both sides ultimately give up, and attrition stalemate. When we think about at least 4 of those, these are the ones which no one expects, none of the agents really expect to happen over the next four weeks. So this is a 4-week forward-looking horizon over where do we think this conflict will be 4 weeks from now. So 4 of these scenarios are out. As you'll see historically, or when we go back to the beginning of the conflict, this was not always so. The biggest concentration of analyst opinion is on the fact that within 4 weeks, the war will still be going on, with Iran seeking to attack its neighbors in order to demonstrate its seriousness in inflicting pain, perhaps to prevent the mowing the grass strategy. So the outcome which attracts the most analyst weight is regional war continuing. Regime fracture is something you'll see over time has become slightly more likely, but less than half the weight given to regional war. The nuclear sprint one is, just let me clarify there, this is not the argument that Iran will use a nuclear weapon. It's more that Iran will look at the threat to its self and worry so much about this that it will accelerate its nuclear program so as to try and enhance its capabilities in this regard. Ultimately, as of yesterday, our analysts were sort of expected that this war will go on for at least another 4 weeks, and that there is some chance of regional fracture, but the weight is on essential continued ongoing conflict. Now, as Steve has highlighted, at the moment, part of that regional war includes keeping the Straits of Hormuz closed, and I will have specific predictions about that in a minute as well. So this is the first snapshot. Then we go on to the historical evolution over the 20 days of the conflict. Let me just summarize this. The conflict pretty much starts with analyst opinion expecting some type of negotiated exit from this conflict, perhaps with the sort of Venezuela scenario in mind, decapitate the top of the regime, replace it with an insider. This very, very quickly gives way to the expectation that there will be some type of stalemate, which is driven by some type of stalemate, which will ultimately essentially lead to this conflict ending. You can see that that was the dominant view from days 2 to 7, and then what creeps up over time and has largely maintained is that as Iran's capabilities and determination became clear, the analyst weight shifted more and more towards Tehran widening the war and causing significant damage to its neighbors as a way of putting pressure on them to put pressure on the United States. From day 16 or so onwards, there's a bit of a wobble. Interestingly, we begin to see essentially the concerns about regime fracture growing within Iran, especially as more and more senior people are killed and bombing regimes or attacked. And so this tends to absorb a bit more weight. Plus, growing expectation that Iran will go for the nuclear sprint option. So this then resulted in the last few days, this is from day 17 onwards, in some pullback in the analyst expectation for how long this war, for a regional war continuing, but still it's the dominant scenario. It's the most prevalent scenario of the ones that we have. And you can see in the last day or so, this has begun to stabilize and in fact has turned around as well. So what we're left with then is a war which has seen shifts in analyst opinion, but what has, if you had to point to a signal that has come through strong, it is Iran's determination to widen this war, to maximize, or to inflict damage on its neighbors, creating exactly the escalation ladder that Steve highlighted, and which could go much further, exactly as Steve mentioned, with respect to energy infrastructure, desalination plants, and the like. So this gives you a sense about how the perception of this the assessment of this war has changed. What are the most important things that have changed this week? They're listed here. The Ras Laffan complex being hit was a major shift in expectations of the analysts that we have. Saudi Arabia coming forward to reserve military action, also seen as a potential intensifier of a regional war, but also possibly providing the cover for the US ultimately to withdraw. The oil price spikes points to the energy consequences of this particular action, and the result ultimately is that the regional war probability rises here as well. So these have been the major developments in the past week that the analysts have focused on. By the way, our website, which we have all of this information on, lists the most noteworthy events which the analysts think have moved their opinions the most. Let's move forward to some specific predictions on outcomes. We asked the analysts, all 14 of them, to analyze whether or not they expect to see U.S. action, military action ceasing over a 3-month time horizon, whether we see Iranian action ceasing over a 3-month time horizon. Sorry, Israeli action ceasing over a 3-month time horizon, and when we expect to see the first unescorted commercial vessel through the Straits of Hormuz. And the results that we have are very little expectation of the Israelis stopping the action, which I think is an independent factor we may want to get into in the discussion. There almost no expectation that will stop over the next 3 months. What is interesting is the sort of median position of the analysts as far as U.S. action ceasing does not point to action stopping for about the best part of 3 months. So you have to get into the 3rd month before 3 months from now before there's a 70% chance of, or 70% of our analysts believe that there will be a U.S. cessation of action. And then when it comes to the key commercial choke point, at least as far as energy is concerned, the Straits of Hormuz, the consensus position of our analysts is that there's only a 23% chance in 3 months that this strait will return to a situation where we have unescorted commercial vessels. I should add here that the key constraint is not just the closing of the strait from a military point of view and the fact that there could be attacks on ships and mines. It's also the availability of insurance to allow ships to pass through the Straits of Hormuz, which may also be delayed. Now, my own reaction to the last sets of predictions is that a 3-month delay or 3-month closing of the Straits of Hormuz would have quite serious knock-on effects, which I think we'll get into in Q&A. And so that's one of the reasons why we created the red team, which is contrarian estimates. And the red team has essentially, so this deliberately tries to stand apart from the mainstream view, and it emphasizes the economic downsides. And there it forecasts that by the 1st of May, it expects around 35%, a 1 in 3 chance that we will see commercial vessels going through the Straits of Hormuz unescorted. So essentially, even the most optimistic assessment still calls for the strait to be closed for another 5 weeks or so. And then when it comes to US military action, the red team does give some credence to the US pulling out by the 1st of May, around 2/3 of the time. So there are confounding views, and the website reproduces the confounding views so that you can challenge your own insights as well. So ultimately, let's step back and reflect on how Steve set this up. How long is this thing going on for? Key question. It's hard to find analyst positions, even the contrarian ones, which argue that this will be over very quickly. We are talking about essentially a 1 or 2 month process. To the extent that that 1 or 2 month process involves the Straits of Hormuz being closed, then you can draw through all the implications for energy prices, for the availability of oil and gas, and the ripple effects this is having in some sectors and geographies, which I'm sure we'll get into. And lastly, to reiterate the point that Steve made, the escalation ladder is still there for Iran should it choose to use it. So this could go on a lot longer, and this could get a lot nastier, is perhaps the depressing bottom line.
So Simon, I just have a couple questions, and also say if people can turn their cameras on, we want to make this not a webinar but interactive. And if you have a question to ask me or Simon, or just a contrarian position, just raise your hand, or you can put it in the chat and keep put your camera on. I would love to have you part of the discussion. So Simon, when you talk about the 14 analysts, these are not people, right? Are we talking about AI? How does this work?
So I'm going to be really provocative here. These are better than people. Okay? And so I'm going to be really provocative, because imagine you had a school of thought about how the world works, which you ingest, absorb, and are forced to classify. And you're only allowed to use that viewpoint to update your perspectives about where this crisis is or conflict is going. By the way, those schools of thought were all defined by great humans and great analysts. So there's a massive human input in here. But suppose you said, oh, we want an analyst who sticks only to that viewpoint. And what do we learn from that viewpoint? That is how we have created these AI agents. And we have forced them to follow certain rules, that they must update their viewpoints using evidence and news which can be documented. They can't just hallucinate. Okay. And they can be challenged on the evidence. They have to come up with opinions. They can't do the economists on the left hand, on the right hand stuff. You have to come up with a viewpoint, and you have to defend it. And so essentially, it's like having 14 argumentative journalists or 14 argumentative professors all defending consistently one viewpoint, who are sitting around your table helping you, the human analyst, make better decisions. So that's the sense in which I see this as highly complementary to the type of expertise which I'm sure some of which is on this call.
Okay, so my human expertise, right, or my human perspective on this, which gets me to the why I think this is going to go with the consensus of your AI analysts. This has still got months to play out, is because the American strategy cannot work of just air power and missiles and the like to eliminate the regime and to result in regime change, and that is, so long as that regime is there, they're going to do everything they possibly can to remain in power. And how they remain in power is to have some type of deterrent. And if they can't have a nuclear, then it is going to be energy. And that's exactly what they're doing. And and it's going to be impossible to stop them, or very difficult anyway to stop them with our current strategy and the current Israeli strategy. So the question is, that you and I have been talking about a bit ourselves, what could we be missing if we're wrong, and this does end sometime in the next month or two? What are the unknown unknowns in the Donald Rumsfeld parlance that you think we might be missing? I have a couple, but what would come to mind for you?
So I think there's maybe there's two things. One, that Iran escalates much faster, much more aggressively with the things like the desalination plants faster than anyone expects. The Iranian approach has been systematic, but it doesn't necessarily follow the timetable, but it is very, I mean, they have progressively moved up the escalation ladder. Imagine that one of those decentralized Republican Guard units starts going rogue and starts really attacking the key desalination plants. So this is that's a wild card factor, which I think is there. The second is whether or not in the financial markets we see some people have made inopportune bets and huge losses are made. Like we saw, I think it was LTCM many years ago, basically racking up $200 billion positions in very short periods of time, which require some types of state financial intervention. And bearing in mind, and I think this is one of the areas where this crisis might intersect with others, we know that the non-bank financial sector has some problems which have been described. The sort of private credit, non-bank private credit sector is in trouble already. And then the question is whether any of this overlaps and intersects with their considerations, and this might raise concerns as well. So that is all then suggesting that the financial channel will be, the financial market overreaction channel might then trigger Washington to rethink. But this then begs the question, exactly as you quoted earlier, Washington's willingness to pull back in no way implies that Tehran's willing to pull back. So again, that wild card is very, very messy. But that would be the second one I would say I wouldn't be surprised by.
Okay. All right. Well, this has been a great on the record discussion, and we'll go off the record in a moment. So I want to thank Simon for being agreeable to be on the record and to put this out there so that we can all use this and think through things in a much smarter way than we've been able to do before. Okay. So